for hanging around this morning and talking to us and listening about Medicare and cell therapy and some of the latest policy developments in the space. When the FDA approved the first CAR T therapy in the summer of 2017, the agency said that its approval was ushering in a new approach to the treatment of cancer and other serious and life-threatening diseases. CMS said that Medicare and Medicaid would ensure that beneficiaries have access to new and potentially life-saving treatment for patients who have nowhere else to turn. Earlier this year, the FDA noted cellular and gene therapy-related research and development continues to grow at a fast rate, something we all obviously know. With the recent advancements in mantle cell cancers, continued line extensions in myeloma and DLBCL, this is certainly true in CAR T cell therapy. We also expect T-cell immunotherapies, such as TILs, to be approved, along with CAR T for adult ALL and in autoimmune disorders, such as lupus, in the coming years. So with the advancements in cancer, and now autoimmune disease, what issues still exist in acceptance of these innovative therapies by public and private payers? And that's what we're here to talk about this morning. What guidance or changes to CMS policies are necessary? Can innovative payment models work? What about the increased role of Medicare Advantage and its hidden impact on payment and coverage, something that's not talked about a lot? This is what we'd like to discuss. And so with that, we have a great panel for you this morning, all experts in their fields, and we're very fortunate to have them here and appreciate them traveling all this way. First up is Keren Shani, Executive Director of Cell and Gene Therapy at Trinity Life Sciences, a consultant to manufacturers and others in the life science space. Brent Rice, Chief Commercial Officer for the U.S. for Autolus Limited, and Chair, maybe more importantly, Chair of the Medicare Advisory Group for ARM. Marianne Hamilton Lopez, Senior Research Director at Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy. And Stephanie Farnia, Consultant at Nimitt Associates and former Head of Cell and Gene Therapy Policy for the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Please welcome them. Great. Well, Marianne, I'm going to start with you. You're right in the middle in the bullseye.
I'm ready.
Back in 2019, Duke-Margolis, so long ago, Duke-Margolis Center for Policy convened a year-long forum. Brent and others took part in that, I think Stephanie as well, on issues like durability, accelerated approval, strength of evidence, pathways, and registries. Duke has also done quite a bit of work in the area of value-based payment, along with New Dig, so we heard from Marc yesterday, I believe, in putting forth a framework for early pay for value consideration, which today has proliferated into lots of things that we've talked about throughout this conference and this morning: value-based arrangements, cell and gene therapy riders from payers, employer-focused cell and gene therapy access programs across the commercial landscape. Could you just give us a bit about your work and how you've seen the landscape unfold, especially in Medicare?
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation to join and give the perception of the policy nerd. But I think Marc put up a paper that came out of some work that we did along with Spark and Bluebird Bio back in 2017, and it was really about saying, okay, this is coming. What are we ready? And, is it going to be, what are the tools at our disposal to think about some of the uncertainties that we've been hearing from those who will actually be using these innovative products? And I think that work has continued. The project that you raised from 2019, which we really tried to bring together everybody who was in this ecosystem, whether that was FDA was there, and you already mentioned Stephanie and Brent, and we had those who were from registries, and it was really a question of once we get through this regulatory process and we're here, who's going to address kind of this question, like, will these work? And who's going to own that evidence? Is it going to fall on FDA? Are they going to be tracking? Is it going to be all on the insurance companies? Will the manufacturers be in charge of each one of their products? And is this maybe something that registries could step up? And I think it was a really rich discussion, and one where we all left saying we still have a lot of work to do. And, you heard from Ellen that there's, people coming in and out of different kind of health insurance programs and plans. And I think that what continues to be what we see is that the innovation is there, the patients are excited, they're seeing a future ahead that they didn't think they could, dream about. But there's a lot of questions on the implementation still. And then that will be about, will those who will be making those decisions, not just your big insurance companies, but your state Medicaids, will they feel like they are getting what they pay for? The small employers who are putting plans forth and wanting to cover this for their employees, will they feel like they can make those decisions without putting themselves in an economic situation? So I think that the work we do is trying to bring together all those different stakeholders in a pre-competitive environment and saying, we are all here because we think this is good work. Everyone got into this because they want to make a difference. But if we don't think this through thoughtfully, if we don't think about how the impact of prices might be seen or implemented, if we don't think about who's going to own that evidence so people feel like they can watch long-term that these products work and that they're worth the price tag, then we're going to have a lot of products that might not necessarily have the access issues that we all hope to see.
Great. And let me just do one follow-up real quick. So I know you love follow-ups.
You didn't tell me this.
So Ellen talked a lot, right, about the models that they're proliferating and about value-based care. Tell us a little bit about the consortium that you put together and your work in value-based arrangements, and maybe specifically around cell or gene therapy.
So we put together a consortium in 2017. It's designed to be multi-stakeholder, so have manufacturers from all sorts of different companies, including gene cell therapies and gene editing companies. We also have representatives from the payer community, hospitals, and patient advocacy organizations. And we all are there to talk about what is value, because value gets thrown out quite easily. We're talking about value for prices now in the Medicare space. We're talking value for all sorts of healthcare related services and products. So this group really tries to think through who's making those decisions, what do you do when there's different definitions of value, and then very practically, do we have systems designed to track value? I heard talking about years of 1, 3, and 5 for these agreements. That's not a norm for if we do a value-based payment arrangement between manufacturers and payers, it's not likely that you'll see, at least today, like 5-year agreements. They're usually much shorter, and sometimes you have to work with the data you have. We've done some research as part of this consortium with states who have tried outcomes-based contracts, and what are they thinking, and how do they see that along with the pipeline of products coming their way. And some of them are pretty open, like we can track and make these contracts, but we have to use the data we have. So maybe it's going to be about refills and whether or not someone goes to a doctor's appointment. We can have that data, but it's not necessarily value. It's not necessarily is this drug or therapy transformative, and we have a ways to go to get there. So this consortium works through a lot of research projects to try to think through, in this pre-competitive environment, how are we going to come up with some ideas and some policy options that not everyone's going to love, but if we don't have them if it's only pharma talking to pharma or payers talking to each other, we're not going to get very far. Great.
I think the rest of us on the panel tackle things we don't love every day. We'll talk a little bit about that now. Keren, as a consultant to cell and gene manufacturers, obviously as a former bird in the nest at Bluebird, do you see the same themes that Marianne was talking about? I mean, people worry about durability, worry about value, whether they'll actually get paid, in the commercial payer space that Marianne talked about for Medicare and some of the work they're doing at the center.
Absolutely. And then excited to be here. Broadly speaking, similar themes, yep, between commercial and the Medicare side. Taking a step back for a minute, so since cell therapies were approved, we've seen primarily payers reimbursing through single case agreements. We're seeing a little bit more interest and uptake in case rate negotiations, and so that's again, a leading edge on the commercial side as far as that. And we're also hearing interest in discussion around negotiating inpatient and outpatient case rates so that payers start seeing the benefit of, managing some of those costs. So a little bit of, some of the themes we're hearing on the commercial side, specifically with regards to the value-based agreements, it's a similar theme of lots of excitement, lots of interest. We've been talking about it for years, little actual uptake. So unless there are some pilot programs such as Harvard Pilgrim, which is again that leading edge in the commercial payer world, for the most part, it's a lot of talk, honestly, and very little action. Acknowledging the challenges. So most managed care organizations are pointing to the same themes we heard from Ellen and from Marianne, where what are the outcomes? Are they subjective? Are they trackable? Do they actually show the durability and benefit of the therapy? And how? How do we track this data? So I think until we have a little bit more integrity and clarity around how we're going to do this, it's still very little actual implementation that we're seeing on the commercial side. One other interesting, leading edge is the warranty agreements that we're hearing talk of. And so we're hoping that we'll see that potentially in hemophilia with the gene therapies that are approved. Obviously, gene therapies, there's a lot more focus because of the high upfront cost on, is a value-based agreement possible? Should we implement a warranty? But still in the phase of interest and little uptake overall.
Great. Well, Brent, that's a good segue. I'm gonna take you back to Medicare and the landscape. It'd be great to talk a little bit about the Medicare landscape as compared to private payers, and especially around reimbursement. I mentioned in the introduction that you serve as the chair of the Medicare advisory group from ARM. Obviously, ARM has had for years issues around NTAP for these therapies. Can you elaborate a little bit on maybe both? The environment generally and like NTAP and some of the other issues that you worry about on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, with the Medicare Advisory Committee, we've been very engaged with CMS, the administration, on the need to make improvements with a focus on improving access for Medicare beneficiaries, right? So, I mean, the advent of the MSDRG-01A was a great accomplishment to get that put into place, but the goal is to reduce uncertainty of reimbursement to the hospitals. That's the goal, to improve access and reduce reimbursement uncertainty. I would say with this rulemaking cycle, I feel like we took a little bit of a step back in that area, right? The proposals that were put in place and the rule is making it a little bit more restrictive. We changed the timeline from July 1 for the approval to May 1. We made the hurdle higher as far as what you need to have submitted and in place prior to submitting your application, which makes it more difficult as well. That's going to create a bigger gap, I think, as far as access for these Medicare beneficiaries. We're advocating for a biannual cycle. We met with the NTAP team and had a very good meeting with ARM. They were very receptive, very open, acknowledged the issues that we brought forward. In their final comments, they acknowledged their willingness to take a look at the biannual cycle again in the next rulemaking period. So that's positive, but there's a lot of areas where we need to implement changes. Changing the requirements that limit it to 1 to 3 years, extending that out to 5 years. Improving the reimbursement rate, going from 65% to 80%. These are all key things. Taking a look at other analogs like breakthrough devices and the changes that were made there as well, right? So there are analogs to point to that support the recommendations that we're making. But we also need to understand the challenges that they're facing, which is a lot of resourcing challenges, and find the correct way to structure this. If it was a biannual cycle, we would be looking at implementation dates of October 1 and April 1 is what we were proposing. So we need to continue down that road, look for ways to continue to improve it. These are innovative precision medicines that the agencies weren't ready for. The market wasn't ready for this, right? Mm-hmm. So we're playing catch up, and we're constantly playing catch up and trying to improve this and reduce the uncertainties for the end stakeholder. And we need to keep doing that and look for additional ways to improve. I think one of the things that we need to look at, we've talked about it, when Marianne, we brought it up in our conversations a couple of years ago, looking at new benefit design, for cell and gene therapies. Yep. I think we're at the point where we need to take a hard look at that, and we need to get together with all the stakeholders and kind of map out what that could look like.
Let me ask you, you brought up DRG 018. Another issue that has been on and off of ARM's mind in its old governance and now with the Medicare Advisory Group is the potential for misalignment in the CAR-T DRG 018 between CAR-Ts and new T-cell immunotherapies, because CMS decided to lump both together. With the potential introduction, right, later this year, next year, of different T-cell immunotherapies, what is your take on how CMS can fix that misalignment?
Yeah, it goes back to my comment on the goal is to reduce reimbursement uncertainty with the MSDRG. I think that's just increasing the uncertainty because these therapies, some of the therapies we know that are coming, others they're further down the road. They have different manufacturing processes, different delivery processes. So those costs will be different. They may not be as intensive as they are with cell and gene therapies, and so that could have a negative impact and create more uncertainty relative to the MSDRG rate. So again, I think a cleaner way to approach this would be to define and set a separate benefit category for cell and gene and continue to segment out these new innovative therapies in ways that is more manageable for the administration and reduces uncertainty for the hospitals that are using these medications.
Yeah, it would certainly make it easier, maybe in a smoother glide path as these therapies want to move from inpatient to outpatient, as Keren mentioned, both under Medicare, under commercial, and Medicaid. Stephanie, I know that amongst other things, you represent providers and ASTCT. Do you have anything to add to Brent's comments? Like, what's the view of the provider community that are performing these therapies on inpatient reimbursement challenges?
They've put me last because I talked too much on the prep call. How many people, just quick show of hands, apologize, understand how payment rates for DRGs get set, just conceptually, big picture? Okay, a couple. So DRG payment rates are not sort of pulled out of the air. They're actually from claims that providers send in, and it's typically a 2-year time lag, right? So the fiscal year 2024 DRG payment rate is based on claims that were sent in by providers in fiscal year 2022. So you've always got that lag. It's even though it's the prospective payment system, it is not reflecting what's coming up and the anticipated costs. It's 2 years in the past. So we continue to see some issues with DRG 18 just around the kind of data that goes in, may not be the highest quality for lots of reasons, and then the edits that CMS does to it in order to come up with that payment rate, right? So we spend a lot of time thinking about some really in the weeds technical stuff, the cost to charge ratio that they hit for the line that the CAR-T product comes in. People essentially have to, a low estimate would be you'd have to completely quadruple the cost, the acquisition cost, and put it on the charge, or put the charge on the claim is something like 1.6 million, 2 million. In the land of price transparency and optics and newspaper headlines, that can be really uncomfortable for hospitals to do. And then if they don't do it, what CMS thinks they actually paid for the product because of that cost to charge ratio is inadequate. The payment rate continues to be low. It brings everybody, it's a sink or swim together kind of thing because of those claims being brought through. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at that. I mean, one of the biggest indicators that even though it's the highest paying DRG in the system, that it's not enough is that 61% of the CAR T claims received significant, like over $100,000 on average, outlier dollars from the outlier pool. So the outlier pool is a certain dedicated amount of money for when the DRGs for any service, aren't enough. And then you have to lose a certain amount. It's like your deductible gap. It's $42,000, the fixed loss threshold for this year. That's the highest it's ever been. We do think CAR T cases are contributing to that because of how much they're pulling from the outlier pool. And then sort of the bread and butter DRGs that hospitals do, like a regular lymphoma stay or something, they have to then lose $42,000 per case in order to get into the outlier pool, which still only pays 80% of those charges, right? So we're preparing, it's the time of year for the DRG modification letters, that deadline is coming up, and so ASTCT will be taking another swing at, separate from the concept of like, how do we drastically redo the DRGs and what do we put in there and things, is what are the continuing issues with the nuts and bolts of how costs are really being computed and the dollars that are coming back to the hospitals that are providing those services now.
Great. What about outpatient therapy? You given thought to that?
I mean, it just seems so easy compared to the inpatient side, right? ASP plus 6 is pretty great. There are some issues that are coming up right now, again, super nerd stuff, the status indicator assigned to a HCPCS code, so that the CAR Ts that have been on the market, would have had a status G indicator for pass-through, right? That was more important when you had sort of the 340B adjustments and that kind of thing that has now gone away. But they switch over to a status indicator K. And there are some, it's fairly rare, but there are sort of a series of events that could happen. If you did an outpatient infusion, you didn't want to admit the patient, but you were going to keep them for a certain number of hours of observation. It's sort of a number of criteria that would have to tick down the list. But in that situation, the CAR T product could be swept up into the observation comprehensive APC, and you'd get about $2,000 for all of it. You would not get that separate payment. So that's another area that ASTCT has been advocating for, is to take those really high-cost drugs and make sure that they do not get swept up in any of the CAPCs that are not made to account for that. But that's like the one bug on the windshield for outpatient payment right now.
Great. Well, I have another question for you, but before I do, let me ask Keren or Brent about outpatient and if there's anything. I know from a commercial point of view, you mentioned earlier that it's on the minds of payers and certainly on the minds of the organizations you work with, and I know it's been on Brent's mind as well in terms of the sort of goal, the bright light would be to move therapies to outpatients. I don't know if you all want to add anything before we.
It sounds like you're passionate about it.
We're very focused on outpatient. I mean, we're developing all of our therapies to be setting of care agnostic. So we're focused on outpatient. We're very engaged with the treatment centers. I think everyone's noticed that treatment centers are really investing in outpatient capabilities, expanding outpatient capabilities. There's a variety of reasons for that. Yes, it's simpler from a reimbursement standpoint. It's a lot easier. It's very streamlined. But it's also creates more capacity, right? Whether you're an academic center or a non-academic center, you have a limited number of inpatient beds to take care of patients. We saw this exacerbated in the middle of the pandemic, where there was a shortage of beds, and so we saw the advent of telehealth, and that was a great introduction that a lot of it is stuck with us, and I hope it continues to stay with us. But we need to continue to support the centers where they're able to treat more patients. They have greater throughput when they can treat patients in both inpatient and outpatient. As Stephanie mentioned, I mean, in a lot of cases, the way they set up the outpatient is it's across the street from the inpatient. It's very similar. Other centers are very creative. If a patient has a side effect and comes in and they need to make sure that the patient isn't hospitalized within 3 days, they'll have other types of care centers that are available to treat those patients without admitting them. But this is clearly very important to the centers. It's important to patients to be able to get more of these therapies to patients where they reside and give the centers choices of how they want to administer.
Great. Keren, I don't know if you have any other comments.
Absolutely agreed. And I think the question really now is, how long will it take for cell and gene therapy to expand into the community? And what support do sites actually need at the end of the day? Because, and you touched on this, Brent, and I absolutely agree. I think from my personal experience, you know, you've seen one site. We all know that at this point. And so we've seen, again, some leading indicators such as Penn and Lancaster General that are able to start formalizing and operationalizing and actually implementing a model where you can take cell and gene therapy programs and move them out to the community, exactly to what you said, you know, beneficial from a financial perspective, but very importantly, from a capacity perspective, because we heard, you know, we all know how many therapies are coming down the pipeline, and it's absolutely not possible for all of those therapies to continue to live within the academic medical center network that they have historically and to date lived in. And so while the models are coming out and there's absolutely movement to building that infrastructure and those capabilities in the community, there are also sites that have no idea. You know, it's really starting from zero, ground one. And so it's on us, I think, collectively as an industry to support that, because there's a lot of help, education, potentially funding, infrastructure, building, et cetera, that the industry needs if we're really going to expand into the community to that extent.
Great.
Can I ask a follow?
You sir can.
I'm going to go backwards a bit, but so you, this is a question maybe for, you know, Stephanie, when you're talking about how you're having to kind of just that scenario of having to not be as transparent in their reporting, so that then that it has the effects, and so what you're trying to do is build up the knowledge about kind of really what is being lost in the way that we're currently doing it. Do you have a sense of, does CMS is it not widely known that this is the complication? And does there need to be an education there before we can even start talking about benefit categories and new, like where do we come in with kind of, does everyone on board that these are the issues, and then that could lead to let's do something like a benefit, you know, category, or do we still have a ways to go to say this is even an issue in the first place?
I feel a new collaboration coming on. Right here.
Happy to work with Marianne.
Arm history.
Do I think things have been communicated clearly through the comment letter process? Yes.
Okay.
Do I think that has maybe fully registered in a way that has incentivized action? You know, not yet. I think we are getting to a point where we will have critical mass in terms of total. I mean, this is still very small claims volume.
Yeah.
And if you are sitting in the side, if I'm sitting sort of from the agency side, just sort of projecting from some prior past payer experience, you have already done wildly different rate setting for 18 than you have done for anything else, right? Like the number of concessions that have been made there is pretty substantial. And so I'm sure at some point they're like, why are these people back again, you know, asking for other stuff, right? But it's because CAR-T is on that edge of trying to push it and set it up for everybody else. You know, so it's just this, it wasn't built for this, right? Like the drug CCR that gets hit, cost to charge ratio that CAR-T gets hit with, has been formed from years and years and years of the markups that get put on, you know, the sort of usual example, $100 ibuprofen, like that kind of stuff, right? The markup that you would have to put on in order to have the pharmacist that can staff your hospital and do all those kinds of things. And so right now, we have been doing a ton of education of the providers to say, this is crazy, and if you want to get reimbursement, you are going to have to battle with your charge master team and your CFO and everybody else to be okay with this, because the only way you're going to get your dollars back. And then at the same time, having conversations in the letters. I mean, next level super nerd is to follow this, you know, across multiple comment letter rules to say, what you're asking these hospitals to do is completely nonsensical for everyone at this point. Can we step out of it and think of something else? Can we use, part of what we have worked on the last couple of years with the National Uniform Billing Committee organization, which I'm sure a lot of you probably have not even know existed, but to create new codes for cell and gene therapy with the hope in a couple of years, as those are being implemented on cost reports right now, to get a new cost to charge ratio specifically for those products, so that you can sort of step out of it but still play within the system enough that you're not asking for potentially another super special different thing. Everyone who comes into a payer is special and amazing. No one comes in and says, like, I've got this kind of average thing, I want you to do something special for it, right? So it's trying to figure out how you play enough in the system to not completely upset everything and still get what
still get
providers
something
need
done.
to get patients access. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask about another sleeper issue. So since,
no.
yeah, one that we talk about a lot,
Okay.
off camera, which is Medicare Advantage.
Yeah.
Right. So people don't think about it. It's sort of off to the side, but yet more and more Medicare patients are going into managed care, and that presents some issues, as you say, both sort of above the line and in the weeds.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about both?
Yeah, this has been my personal campaign this year to talk about Medicare Advantage. So we're over 50% in terms of the beneficiaries now, and that's been a pretty deliberate strategy. People have been pretty open about that. The part I think that most people don't realize is that those DRG payment rates, what we were talking about before, that come from 2 years ago data, that all comes from fee-for-service data. So that increase in the Medicare Advantage enrollment means decreasing fee-for-service claims, but that's what's used to set the payment rate. And the Medicare Advantage plans actually use that DRG rate, the fee-for-service rate, for what they pay as well. So you have diminishing claims. They're also not geographically representative at this point. If you look at the states that have the highest fee-for-service enrollment, where the most claims would be coming out of, not typically heavy hitters in terms of large academic centers or the people that are really pushing some of this innovative treatment out to the populations and things. So just from a statistical standpoint, we've got a problem with the matchup in terms of what's coming in and where rates are being set for that. So I really think that is something that could benefit from more stakeholders getting in there. We did get one promising sentence from CMS in this year's rule that they acknowledge it and hopefully will come back with some kind of analysis in the fiscal year 2025 proposed rule. So we are excited to see what that might be.
Good. Well, Marianne, I'm going to come back to you real quick and then go down the row. But let's talk about Medicaid for a minute. So we talk a lot about Medicaid in gene therapy, not as much about Medicaid in cell therapy, although it's still important. And there are therapies that will have, traditionally oncology is like 4 to 6% Medicaid. There are definitely some CAR T therapies and others that'll have way more than that. Are there barriers to coverage there? Are there barriers to payment? What are the issues? I know Duke has been looking at that, and I know actually penned a paper with Tom Barker, who is our speaker on Tuesday, about challenges in the Medicaid program.
There are, but I think it comes down to, the practical again. It's as I think Ellen was saying, they can't. When you're talking about states themselves and they're trying to do their annual or biannual budget, and they have to balance, and so they're the ones who are coming to us and saying, we see this coming and we don't know what to do. Like, we don't know if that's, do we pull from somewhere else? Do we have the administrative capability to cover in the cell gene, and so the work that we've been doing right now has been a lot of fact finding and trying to see, is this on states' minds? It is, and but they want to figure out. I think that's where you're going to find the most innovation. They want to whether it's an outcomes-based contract or some other tool, they're ready to try anything. Because they realize that they will have to be covering. They they have to in a lot of times, but it's going to be they have to think about it kind of very big picture. Will they, is it just going to get access to the drug? Is it going to be then thinking through how will they apply, and what does that mean for trying to get it to all their Medicaid populations, and then additionally on kind of what that will just do overall to budgets. And so I get asked to sometimes speak to legislators, and that's their question. It's about how will do we need to do legislation? Is there policies and that kind of we should be thinking through that will get us ready to make some of these payment decisions? Because I don't think that they're saying we're not going to we're out, we're not going to cover, but I think they're still trying to think through if the prices are something that, especially because it's a high upfront cost, and that's what it's really at the big point of all of this, is that it's going to, we are fee for service, we're transactional, you pay for when the product is done, and if we're talking about, potentially one time high up front, which you can argue is going to make long-term savings for the state, for everybody, because you'll have someone who's healthy and can work and contribute to their society. But as Stephanie keeps saying, we're just not built for that. We are not built to kind of realize those savings long term when the transaction is right here, and the state Medicaid program is trying to figure out how they'll cover it in this fiscal year.
Yeah. I think one question I have, maybe starting at the end, but to your point, and whoever wants to ask, but you kind of teed it up, is when are we going to be built for that? Because we obviously, as my note said, like we launched the first CAR T in 2017. It's well past that. Yeah. We now have a handful of gene therapies on the market. What else needs to be done in the last 5 minutes of our talk? No. But,
fixing everything.
Yeah.
I will say over the past few days, listening to all the different panels and sessions, I think there's a clear theme that we're all pulling through as folks that have been in this industry for a while, is that we are still in the beginning. As much as we'd like to feel like we're progressing and we're really experts, but I think we're all still learning, honestly. And so, I'll pass it down the line just as far as Medicare specific, what would we like to see change and how fast. I think it's going to take time, but I think across everything we've said, we're just still really grappling. And I think the more, with a lot of positive successes, a lot of growth, a lot of true, patient care achieved, which is what we're here for at the end of the day. So the system's working enough to get us there, but obviously there's a lot of growth that we still need. And we could sit here for hours and talk about what specifically those things are, but I don't know, Brent, if you have specific thoughts there.
Yeah, no, Medicaid is very challenging. I would say in a lot of ways it's more challenging than Medicare. Medicare, we go to CMS and we're looking at more national fee-for-service solutions, right? Medicaid, we have to go to each state. So we have to go to each state. Each state complexion looks very different. Some states have very little fee-for-service lives. It's all been delegated out with geographic managed Medicaid. Other states have larger fee-for-service. You have to understand who's controlling the formulary and the process. So you really have to break this all down. It's difficult. They have very difficult budgets to work with. We're still working on annualized actuarial calculations for setting benefits, and that's difficult when you're looking at therapies that have a lifetime benefit. That's the goal, and more time will tell what lifetime looks like and how that's defined by product. But there's a lot of work that we need to do. There's certain states that don't have a certified treatment center, and so they have to seek care in another state. That's very complex. I deal with this in Europe as well when we call it cross-border. Here it's cross-state, but it's a very difficult negotiation calculation.
The states, who pays for it? Is it the state?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So the originator state has to pay for it, but they have to negotiate with the state that's delivering the care, right? In the meantime, these are rare diseases. You have a patient waiting. while all this is going back and forth, that patient may not have time to wait.
Yeah,
These are
especially in cell
typically-
therapy.
Yeah, these are typically relapsed refractory patients who've exhausted all options. So our system is putting patients at risk, right? So we definitely need to find ways to improve this and improve it quickly.
Great. Marianne, any thoughts, closing comments?
Well, I really agree. I think what you hear is that even though we're all looking at this from different perspectives, there is just a commonality in that we see that there's a lot of excitement for what's ahead, and I've certainly felt that at this conference. So many people who are, building these products and are like, this is going to be, life-changing for people, and that's really nice when you're kind of in DC and policy land. You don't always get to see that this matters so much for those who are creating the products. Then you kind of feel like the hugest buzzkill when you come in and say, yes, but we have so many important decisions to make. And I don't want us to always, it's just a product of our fragmented health everything, but we have a hard time fixing something that we know is coming and is big if it's not in front of us and is an emergency. And I just think that in the cell and gene is such an example of something we should be giving a lot of thought to how we could do smaller things, maybe not smaller, but like more of the not sexy stuff of changing how things the costs are reported and how it's done, just to make some incremental changes there, as well as trying to really get our system ready. Because I agree with everything you've said. We're going to kind of bumble through some things, but meanwhile, there's a lot of patients that are waiting for us to get this right, and it's going to take a very comprehensive approach to do that.
Great. Stephanie, closing comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be a nerd, right? It's really fun, messy problems with the goal of bringing these awesome new therapies to patients, right? On the provider side, we need to see some of that NTAP modernization. That's a really big deal right now. NTAP is not a panacea, but it's very important for those first couple of years. We need to work on some of the technical stuff that the Medicaid cross-program credentialing thing, which I know is a priority for ARM, is I didn't realize until a colleague who's done a lot of contracting walked me through. It's not just the financial negotiations. The actual enrollment process is horrendous. You have to get every provider who's going to touch a patient individually enrolled with that state, and sometimes with the MCO on top of it, and that is not an easy thing. It's like copies of your diploma, fingerprinting, background check, and then it only lasts for so long, and if you haven't had enough claims sent in, you get kicked out of the system and have to start over. I mean, that's one of those things that seems really nonsensical and could be cleaned up to allow the providers to really focus their time and effort on getting the therapies to the patients that need them.
Great.
And if I can just,
Yeah,
one last
sure.
thing for
Close
us
us
all.
out.
One last plea for us all is that, I didn't realize, I didn't see the time. Providers are really in a tough spot.
Yeah.
And it's just, let's all try as a collective industry to support where we can and meet them where they're at, because they're ultimately bearing the burden of our innovation at the end of the day, and they're truly at that point of delivery of care for patients. And we all come into it with the best of intentions and spirit, and they're now, working with gene therapy 13, 14, 15, cell therapy number 11, 12, 14, and it's just a lot of work on top of the patient care that they're doing. So just keep it close to our hearts as we continue to engage in all these important conversations, because ultimately we're here to support them and patients.
It's a great way to close. Good. Well, thanks everybody for sitting through panel. And okay, we do have time. We technically have time for a couple of questions if you'd like, but also our panelists will be around a bit if people want to grab them. So Erica has the giant cube.
Is that the microphone?
I know, it looks like a Minecraft.
I know.
Thank you so much. I have a question. So what happens, or are you talking about things like when the patients who have Medicare care or Medi-Cal are put into these managed care we run into so many problems. First of all, they're enrolled without ever having to sign things. And many of these patients are, I mean, face it, to qualify, you can't have $2,000 in the bank. I mean, you can't have all of these things. You are disabled, and yet your health insurance can be taken, right? And you're forced into a plan because you did not sign a form saying that I don't want to be in a plan. And then once you get stuck in this plan, and I'm going to say stuck, if you're a healthy person on disability, I think these plans are probably great, but if you are special needs or rare disease, it's very, very difficult. And then getting out of the plan is so complicated. And my question is, are there going to be carved outs for people who may qualify? Because really, seriously, I have a patient I'm working with now. She got put in a managed care. Now she can't get the treatment protocol that her doctor was giving her because her managed care program now doesn't support that. So I'm hoping that, you know, again, in making these decisions, we're taking lessons learned from what's happening on the grounds at the point of care into this. And then I'm a sickle cell mom, and we are getting a cure. Sorry.
Yeah, there are definitely, there are states that have carve-outs. The issue is it's unfortunately not necessarily a carve-out for the patient. It is, I guess in a good way, a carve-out for the drug. And so there are 11 states that have carve-outs that have taken cell and gene therapy and put it in the fee-for-service benefit from a drug perspective. There's also a large number of states that have single state formularies. And so at least there's sort of one decision controlled by the state for a state formulary for cell and gene and rare disease and cancer and other therapies, where the managed care organization has to do what the state directs.
And I think I maybe heard something else in that question too, Marc, which is around network adequacy.
Yeah.
You know, and you have seen, there were 2 proposed rules this year for the fee-for-service side and the MCO side. And that is, I think, something that would benefit for more people working together on as well, where these things are not available at every random facility down the road. You know, we've been fighting on this for a long time with stem cell transplant, now CAR T, where, okay, if you're gonna have people be assigned into these things, there needs to be that metric of what types of care can those providers get to that patient. There needs to be that minimum standard of you have to have a large cancer center, you have to, I mean, I think the network adequacy piece is gonna be how we get at some of that. And so I think those proposed rules, and as CMS continues to look at the comments, I think that's gonna be a really important aspect of that fight.
Yeah, and ARM has been involved in that.
Yeah.
Great. Other comments? Questions? I don't know. All right. Thank you so much, and thank you, Erica.